Give the floor back to her distinguished head of delegation, the Minister.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Based on the questions from the first rapporteur, I will, as I had asked, have a discussion. I will just respond and ask if the questions that I'm answering were correct in the narrative, because I think that you were also having concerns within questions and asking within data that is a little old. And one of the things that I had said in the opening statement is that post-2011, since we tabled the report, a lot of strides had been made, and a lot of the things that were in the 2011 report were actually corrected, especially in terms of even data as it relates to crime and children and violence. We're actually seeing a downward trend in the number of statistics coming in now. So against that background, I'll answer the first question. As it relates to the Child Care and Protection Act and how that act is streamlined and has collaboration with other pieces of legislation, in particular children with disabilities and the HIV policy, the review of the Child Care and Protection Act was completed actually last year. And where we are now is we have taken things like children with disabilities. We also have an HIV workplace policy that has been promulgated and implemented. And we are making sure, and we have made sure, that in the revision of the CCPA, we've pulled into the revision and what will now go forward to Cabinet, which will go to the Legislation Committee for ratification and the new writing of the proposal of the law. The children who have HIV/AIDS, the situation with children with disabilities, because that act has just been passed, which was last year. In addition to that, we've also reviewed our children's adoption policy last year, and we're now making it easier and promoting the adoption of children with HIV/AIDS, and we're actually seeing more persons coming forward asking to adopt children with disabilities and children with HIV/AIDS. One of the things that we're very cognizant of, though, because we've had to flag maybe one or two persons who are living overseas, is that they're not adopting children with these kinds of disabilities to use them in other particular areas. And that's one of the reasons why we also reviewed the policy. So those two policies have been reviewed over the last 2 years, and we're now putting them before Cabinet. I'm not sure if you had any more concerns as it relates to the CCPA. But the answer to your question is yes, it has been reviewed, and taking into consideration all the other pieces of legislation coming into it. And there will be ongoing review. We realize that the status of children change, and the impact of different things globally and otherwise and locally. And so as Minister, we will be consistently making sure that things that are necessary go into it. The discussion about having a universal approach to making sure that there is some degree of policy rigidity as it relates to 0 to 18, which is what you're proposing, and particularly as it relates to the age of consent, and as you said, the Marriage Act. One of the things in Jamaica is that we don't have a child bride policy. We don't see a lot of children coming to try and get married at 16. And whereas our legislation has different pieces, and you're right, that look at different areas. The age of consent is 16. Getting married is another particular age. The Ministry of Justice now is in consultation, looking at a number of pieces. And one of the questions that is being asked, especially in community groups, public fora, and a number of other places, is whether that age of consent in particular should be moved to 18. And we have not come down on any one particular decision on it yet, because we're still having national consultation about it. And that is really just the truth. One of the factors that I think you have to recognize, as well as the committee, in particular jurisdictions is how the impact of moving it from 16 to 18 will impact the resources of any particular country. Because when you do that, you will actually put the burden on the state if there's sexual abuse of a child over 16, for example. So I think in asking countries to have policy rigidity as it relates to age, you also need to realize how it will impact on the country if you have a universal standard of moving it. But just to say, we are reviewing it now, and that review has been taking place over the last year and a half in terms of our child diversion policy and other things coming under the Ministry of Justice. Child rehabilitation in care. And I want to start off again by saying that I remember some of the things that Jamaica got flagged for over the last 4 years was having children in adult correctional facilities. I want to tell you right off the bat that we have worked consistently over the last 2 years. We no longer have children in adult correctional facilities. They have their own facilities. Not only do we have that, but by removing the label of uncontrollable behavior, we've actually gotten quite a bit of those children out of the system. We've moved it from last year to 283 to 203 in the juvenile correctional system. And we've reintegrated those persons either with their families through parental support, as well as putting them in other places of safety and getting other therapeutic care for them. As minister, I can say, and I'm also the Minister of Culture, and one of the things that we've done over the last year, and it was also supported by UNICEF and other multilateral agencies, as well as the government, is in the Girls Juvenile Detention Center, we actually introduced a program called Art for Life. And what Art for Life does is it teaches them music, drama, art. It allows them poetic expression. And it is a way, in addition to the education that they receive, which is a curricula from the Ministry of Education, it also gives them extracurricular activities. We've also introduced those programs in our children's homes. And in introducing them in our children's homes, we've also had mentorship programs for children in our children's homes, and we're rolling out those programs. So yes, we now have rehabilitative processes to really reduce the stress of our children in juvenile centres. Yes, Chair.
Thank you. I think we are very happy to hear about this, but the question in this respect was more limited because it's about the legislation and the regulations, whereas the practice you'll probably get more questions on both the juvenile justice system and children in institutions. So there was limited regulations on alternative care and family placements, I think was said, and also some inconsistency. But I think we can leave those issues. Now you've answered some of them today, and we can leave the rest till you get the more specific questions on these issues, which will be given you later today.
Just to be clear, though, from what you're saying, with regards to the rehabilitation, one of the things coming out of the Ministry of Justice is the child diversion policy, which is making sure that our children do not go into the criminal justice system, first of all, and keeping them out of it. And that is being implemented as we speak. And the other issue is to make sure that they are rehabilitated and making sure that coming out of even removing the uncontrollable label, it's the building of the therapeutic facilities to deal with those particular children, the implementation in policy in terms of how they are educated, all the teachers and person going into juvenile detention centers. And remember, juvenile detention in Jamaican law is under the Ministry of National Security, not under the Ministry of Youth. What you will find is that those things are being implemented as we speak. The interministerial committee that I chair pulls together the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Justice, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Education, all the agencies relating to children, including the Children's Advocate, and we sit together and make sure that we have policy cohesion and also cohesion as it relates to the decision-making and taking of the CRC. And that interministerial was put together in 2012. Did you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, well, I was just wondering if the rapporteur might have any follow-up question to coordination, because that was what was just answered, was the coordination. Any more? How do you pull them together? You say this committee pulls together all ministries and agencies, and you mentioned them, and ensure that there is consistency between the different plans and policies. But how do you do this in practice? Do you meet often, or how do you?
Yes, we do. We actually meet often, and we go through the various things that we feel are important under the protocols and under the convention. In particular, and I can speak to one particular case, the children who were in adult correctional facilities. And I remember really meeting and working through building the new infrastructure, working with the Ministry of National Security, getting the rehabilitation in place, working with the Ministry of Justice to make sure that the uncontrollable label was moved. And so we do meet as a physical body to go through those issues, and we have other issues that we're also working on now. So it's not a virtual committee. It's actually a realistic and physical committee.
Mm-hmm. Ms. Sharif?
Thank you. We just wondered whether NGOs are involved in these meetings.
We do work with our NGOs, and we have a children's task force where we involve most of our NGOs on that, and civil society groups, to talk to them about what we're doing, to get their input on what we're doing. And that is chaired by the head of one of our premier theological institutions, a lady by the name of Reverend Marjorie Lewis. One of the programs that they actually implemented was when we removed the label of uncontrollable, and we were now moving the girls from one particular juvenile center to another, to their home in particular. That children's task force went in, did training, spoke to the girls, and had ongoing dialogue and mentorship with them.
Could I ask, you yourself are obviously a member of that committee and maybe chairing it.
No, I don't chair it.
No, you don't. But
I don't chair the NGO one.
Pardon?
I don't chair the...
No, I was thinking about the other one, the interministerial committee.
I do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I wonder, the members from the other ministries, are they also at a high level from their ministries?
Yes, the Minister of National Security attends, the Minister of Justice, the Minister of Health, the Minister of Education, and we get the highest level of policy decision-making possible on that committee. That's why we had put it together, because we recognized that there needed to be collaborative approaches and a streamlining of how we operated. In addition to that, I should mention that based on what we're doing, we went to the Ministry of Finance and we asked for a division to specifically be financed. And so there's now a division of government called the Child and Adolescence Division, which is under my ministry, which has the responsibility of making sure that these disparate processes are adhered to and are collaborated in. We now have a director of children affairs in the government under my ministry, and that is a new development over the last year. That didn't exist before.
Thank you. That's interesting. When you say you meet regularly or you meet often, would that be once a month, or would it be how often approximately?
I would say once a quarter, because what we have are serious things that once we take the decisions, we have our technical people that go out and deal with it. And remember, I also see my colleagues every Monday at Cabinet. So if I need to have a powwow with them, I can say this is where we are, this is what we're doing. And our permanent secretaries in the various ministries follow up on the plans and programs that need to be implemented.
Yes, I think that's interesting to hear. I think you can go on.
Was the state of the national framework of the Plan of Action for Children. That is complete and will go before Cabinet shortly. The penalties, you rose a question about the sorry. Chair?
Could you tell us a little bit on the National Framework of Action for Children? Could you elaborate a little on that?
Sure. That really is taking into consideration all of the aspects that look from school, how extracurricular, how violence, how all the data was used on what children were experiencing. and bringing together most of that information with solutions on what we needed to be doing to really implement that. It will take resources, and so we have to take it to Cabinet for the Ministry of Finance to sign off on it, for it to get into the budget. And there will have to be a secretariat that oversees it, essentially. So it's not just a policy that will reside on paper. It's a policy that has to have a framework for implementation, to look at how our child protection sector is working and to link those with family reintegration, because apart from having our children in protection, for those who have parents, it's our ultimate responsibility and desire for them to go back to their parents, and it is how you work with the parents to get them back into those situations. So it crosses over on health, education, work, national security, social security, and those particular issues. It's really an overarching plan.
Thank you. I think you can go on.
Okay. As it relates to the penalties, I think you thought that the penalties were not being enforced. Chair, was that?
There were no clear penalties.
Actually, on the contrary, there are very, very clear penalties outlined in our law, especially for sexual abuse of children, especially for neglect of children. And there are very, very clear penalties outlined in Jamaican law, and some of those have been strengthened under the Sexual Offences Act. What you have to remember, and have you ever been to Jamaica? All right, I'm inviting you to Jamaica. Come to Jamaica and see it, feel it, understand it. Because one of the other problems we face as a country is that a lot of our children don't come forward with evidence. And so you will get the report that they are abused, and someone perhaps makes an anonymous report to the Office of the Children's Registry. But when you go through all the legal ramifications, and we've actually improved our legislation, so children also don't have to go to court. They can actually do evidence now by law under video conferencing. We amended that law 2 years ago. What tends to happen, though, is that the families, perhaps, of the children don't want to be embarrassed. And many of them, by the time you get right down to it, don't come forward with the evidence. And so you can't convict, especially for sexual abuse. It happens that you get convictions for incest and sexual abuse. But typically, in cases, and so in order to convict, you need the evidence. I would urge you to speak to our children's advocate. She would actually be able to give you some very good information on what she faces in terms of when she deals with children who go through this, because the laws are very clear, the penalties are very clear, but we're finding that a lot of our children, even adolescents, don't want to come forward with the evidence. They come forward in the beginning, but by the time you get down to it, they don't come forward.
I wonder then, what are you doing in the way of awareness raising of families and children, of course, but also their families, in order to encourage their children and not try to stop them from participating?
There are significant communication campaigns and on-the-ground lectures. The Office of the Children's Registry goes into communities. We go into schools. We have workshops with parents of communities to tell them about the statistics, to tell them about the penalties, what to look for when your child is being abused. Not only does the Office of the Children's Registry does this, but also the Child Development Agency, the Ministry of Justice, and the Office of the Children's Advocate. And we go into different communities across the country and raise that awareness also together. We also have radio campaigns. We have television campaigns. We have a helpline called 188-PROTECT. And I can probably subsume your other question, which was the increase of reports. One of the reasons why you're getting more reports is because of that ongoing awareness and people calling in to 188-PROTECT and the Office of the Children's Registry when a child is neglected, etc. And so it's perhaps not that you're having more statistics of abuse. It's just that people are more sensitized on where to call and how to report it. So there are ongoing systems, but like any change that you want to make in a culture requires time, and it requires being on the ground with manpower and woman power. And so at the end of the day, we've been on the ground and you're actually seeing the results in terms of the increased reporting to the Office of the Children's Registry and the Office of the Children's Advocate?
Thank you. Yasmin?
Thank you. Well, on one hand, you have increased reporting in child abuse cases or sexual abuse cases. But on the other hand, you say that the victims are not coming forward. How do you sort of balance this? Because at the end of the day, there's no justice for these children.
Well, I think one of the things, I'm not sure if my answer covered it then, it's going to take some time, because when you have a circumstance where the child comes forward, or perhaps the parent comes forward, what we do right now is, if the child is sexually abused, before the trial goes to court, we actually place that child with another family member. If the child doesn't have any other family member, and that environment is the only environment that the child has to go back to, we take the child in a place of safety. We immediately start giving the child counseling, because one of the things that we realize is that the mental trauma and the post-traumatic stress is actually more on the child than anything. But typically what happens is you have to have the emotional support, which we do. Some of them actually have the courage to go forward and give the particular kinds of evidence. But that is ongoing, and we're making headway, not as much as I personally would like in terms of the children giving the evidence. But I can't unilaterally go into a family, particularly as a minister, and demand that a mother or a father tells a child to give the evidence. I have been able to say to some people, look, it is important that you do this for your child's own closure. But oftentimes the child gets scared.
Thank you. Ms. Sharif.
You talked about video conferencing.
Yes.
Right? There's confidentiality
There is
also.
confidentiality with that.
Despite
in
all
camera.
of this, despite all of this, we have children who are not coming, families are not coming forward.
Families that are not coming forward, because there's a stigma of shame that some people and some families don't want. And until they see the child as the victim, and it takes a lot of breaking of some social mores and cultural systems for people to not see it as a stain. And as a female minister, I can understand how mothers deal with it, especially if you have a child that has been sexually abused. But we have been doing the kinds of work. We do have, through the CDA, we have serious support systems that hold the hand of the mother as well, or the aunt, or the grandmother. Because when they realize, a lot of times, it's because a child who is sexually abused or abused is done by somebody they know, especially looking at the data universally. When a mother or aunt or someone in the family realizes that this was happening for the entire time under their roof and they didn't know, they too go through their own personal emotional breakdowns. And so what we have been doing is sticking with the families and bringing some of that evidence forward. But typically, we have a lot of work to do in terms of making our children understand. And we go into the schools, the Ministry of Education talks about it, the CRC and the rights of the child are promoted. So a lot of children now in Jamaica can tell you what their rights are. And they speak very openly about it because it's taught in our secondary and primary school level and even at our basic school level. So children at 4 in Jamaica can speak that children have rights, which is a good thing. It's just that they need the courage and assertiveness, especially when they're abused.
I wonder, because I thought these two, or I think these sexual abuses, they would fall into two categories. One of them would be those by a close, somebody close to them. And I guess that is when you place children in another home in the meantime, because if it's somebody else, you wouldn't need to do that. And do you have the same problem of children giving evidence in cases of sexual abuse by somebody else? Because, it might be a stigma attached to that as well, but I guess the situation would be very different. So it would be easier in that case.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. A lot of the children do come forward in rape cases. So if they're sexually abused, which would be considered more often than not as sexually abused / rape, a lot of the children do give the evidence in camera. And some of them actually, I can speak about 2 cases in particular where the person was from overseas and the young person gave the evidence. So yes, they do come forward when it is somebody that they don't know, more often than if it is somebody that they do know.
Thank you. I think you can go on.
Okay. Vision 2030 is ongoing and it's being implemented. There was a question that you had asked about the law not being implemented, and we weren't quite sure which laws you were talking about.
Sorry, that was a general question.
The laws as it relates to child protection, etc., those laws are being implemented, and our judges are very, very cognizant. They're actually trained, and our social workers are trained in what to look for. And so those laws are being implemented also through the children's court, where mothers come and raise issues, and there are a number of them that are being implemented. And I'm not sure if you had a follow-up question with regards to that particular one. Chair, does she have a follow-up question?
I don't know. No.
What my concern is, you've explained that laws are implemented, but despite that, the rate of crime it's very high against children. That's my concern.
Actually, no. I think that's why I would urge you to look at the post-2011 data. The level of crime in Jamaica has actually been reduced. We've actually reduced it by 16%. Last year, shooting is down by 12%, rape is down by 23%. And even further to that, all the statistics relating to children in terms of murder has gone down since 2011. We've moved from 64 all the way down to being 44, and it's trending downwards. Shooting has also moved and is trending downwards from 2011 down to 69. So all of that data is going down because of the intervention mechanisms by the Ministry of National Security. They're treating crime as an epidemic, as a disease. And in treating any disease, you have to treat the symptoms. The Unite for Change program is one such program which has also helped in terms of going into communities, where now 30 communities have agreed to unite for change. And you have seen that reduction. You've also seen the reduction in the number of children that have gone missing, a 10% reduction from last year. And we've been able to return close to 9 out of every 10. Last year we had, I believe, the reason why some children have not been returned and the reason why some children run away are for different reasons. One, as you asked, was community issues. Two, another was parenting issues. Some of the girls felt that they were the discipline at home in terms of the rules. A mother might have said to their child, you can't leave, you need to be home by 6, and they don't feel like coming home at 6 as an adolescent, and they are out doing different things. Another reason is if, strangely enough, and we don't have the exact data to prove it, this is just by way of speaking to some of the children, and speaking to the mothers, if the mother feels that there is someone in the community that might prey on the daughter, they send the child to another relative or another community and report the child as missing, so that the person doesn't know that the child is still there. And so sometimes it's a protective mechanism. We don't have the exact data, but in terms of speaking to people, subtle innuendo, etc. So that is kind of off the record. Yes. Chair?
Would you not want to do a survey on this?
We're actually currently doing that survey now, and the police are helping us with it, because we have a system called the Ananda Alert System, and one of the reasons why we've been able to reduce it by 10% is because, one, we've implemented a system where every year the schools have to now give an up-to-date picture of a child so that we have that on record. Two, we now have video boards in various jurisdictions where we find that the children go off missing more often than not. So as soon as a child goes missing, the OCR gets it, the police get it, and the various broadcasting services put the child up immediately. The other thing is that there's now an integrated response team between my ministry, the Ministry of National Security, the Ministry of Justice, and the Ministry of Education. So we're able to track the child probably 2 weeks or 2 days after the child leaves. And when you speak to, sometimes they go back home and the mother doesn't report that they actually came back home. So even in some of those statistics that you have, sometimes a child comes back home. But what we've been able to do over the last 2 years is really drill down how we monitor missing children. So that is why we can report to say that 9 out of every 10. We probably have, I think it was 7 last year that were dead. So out of the 9 out of 10, 7 unfortunately did not return alive.
Thank you. Ms. Kazova.
Thank you. As I'm speaking for the first time, very warm welcome. I have a really very brief follow-up question. I was going to ask it in the second round, but since we are at the missing children issue, it's I understand that lots of efforts are taken in this regard, but still the problem exists. To understand what are the main reasons for such a significant number of missing children in Jamaica? Did you have any?
809,600 children that we currently have. In 2013, we had 1,984 that went missing. That was a 10% reduction from the year before. And out of that number, we've returned 9 out of 10. The issue with regards to it is cross-cutting. Some of the children basically just run away from home because of different reasons why they want to run away from home. And we find the children and bring them back. What is clear, though, is that we've said to the parents, as soon as they go missing, let us know immediately. And that has now started to take place. So we've been able to really arrest the development of that kind of trend that we've seen over the past 2 years.
Thank you. Ms. Aldozeri.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Is this information that you're providing based on scientific survey research that you have conducted regarding missing children, or?
This is data from the police.
Okay.
I was wondering when you said community issues might be a reason for going missing or from running away from home. What kind of community issues? And I think we still have some problems understanding why do children do this in Jamaica when they don't do it otherwise. I mean, in other places, you have children who are not pleased with their parents' rules in other countries as well. So it has become some kind of trend.
I don't think it has become a trend. I think trend is a wrong word to use. The community issues are just one of them. Yeah, so, for instance, one is perhaps domestic violence. Perhaps a mother has a new boyfriend that the adolescent girl feels a little bit intimidated by, and that is one reason. Another reason is the rules and regulations of the home, and they probably run away to another family member. Another reason is they might have met a young man or an older man who they have decided that they want to be with, and the mother is not giving permission to that relationship. So we are currently looking at all of the reasons why this has happened. I know it seems very strange to you. but it's not exclusive to Jamaica. We have serious issues with as it being a global phenomenon in children running away. The good news is that we're finding them and returning them home. If it was not that we were finding them, then I'd have a problem sitting here and answering this question. But we've found quite a few of them and sent them back home. Yes. Sorry. Yes, sir.
I now have Mr. Muddy on my list.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson, and I would like to join my colleagues in extending a warm welcome to the delegation. It is indeed a worrisome situation with regard to the missing girls, and the reasons, a worrisome situation with regard to the missing girls. And of course, I'm not speaking about only girls, but in fact girls and boys. I'm talking about children in general. But I have two issues here. The 9 out of 10 children who have been returned to their families, was that the efforts of the authorities, or they have returned voluntarily? If it is the efforts of the authority, those children are expected to disappear again for the same reason as they have disappeared in the first time. Coupled with this, what are the efforts being done by the government with regard to awareness-raising campaign among parents, among children themselves in schools about this phenomenon and how to deal with it? It seems that the reasons are mainly social reasons and a break within the families in general, in the Jamaican society. If we are talking about 1,800 children in 2013 have been missing, regardless of how many have returned of them, it becomes a very serious issue in that sense. And of course, we would expect the government to have a certain campaign, a serious campaign within the schools, within families, and so on and so forth. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we have Mr. Gusto.
Can I just...
I think we'll have 2 more questions because they might be related, so yeah, Gusto.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you. And since I'm taking the floor for the first time, I'd also like to welcome all of the members of the delegation of Jamaica to Geneva. I have 2 questions. The head of the delegation said that in communities and families there were conflicts. Now, are there any mechanisms for mediation to try to settle these conflicts within families before they degenerate and lead to murders or children leaving home? And then secondly, as you explained, violence is first and foremost a question of mentalities for those involved, but it's also linked to the free movement of weapons and what is done by the police and law enforcement authorities to try to limit the number of weapons in circulation. Thank you.
Thank you. Then Ms. Kazova.
Actually, my question was asked by Mr. Madi. I was going to ask whether you managed to keep children at home after returning them. But I don't know, Chair, how it's better to do. I have a set of questions which relate to all these problems, but they are mostly fill into the second round of issues.
Then we wait. Okay. Yeah. So we'll have the question answers for Mr. Madi and Mr. Gusto at the moment, I think.
Thank you for your question. The question that you asked was if we have children returning on their own. The answer is yes. And then the parents or the mother or the caregiver reports it back to us that they came home. And typically it's a day, maybe 2 days. The other is if the authorities find the child and take them back. What happens there is that the CDA, which is a child development agency, is called in, And we provide not only counseling sessions, but we work with the family to figure out what the problem was. Sometimes it's perhaps an older mother, sometimes it's a younger mother that just has issues with how to parent, and they get frustrated. And then there are serious conflicts within the child as an adolescent and the mother. And so the CDA has conducted over 1,200 parenting seminars last year alone in dealing with children who are having conflict with parents. I don't want you to think that it's a phenomenon in Jamaica. Missing children is not a phenomenon, and it's not a trend. If one of the reasons why we're looking at the surveys and looking at the data is to better guide us. So I would be very careful how we label something that we don't yet have conclusive evidence on why it is happening. The other question on children leaving home, from Mr. Gasto, I hope that the first set of answers that I gave to the other rapporteur relating to what we're doing in terms of making sure that the conflicts don't happen within the home, which is working with them, the parenting seminars, the counseling, checking up on them, visiting with the parents, making sure that we have our social workers and officers on the ground, and we've increased the manpower on the ground for other reasons as well. I think, yes.
Just to be clear, do you do that before they run away also? I mean, do you do it in order to prevent conflicts in families in general?
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Because typically what happens as well is that the mother might come to the CDA, because we have regional offices and we have parish offices in Jamaica. We have 14 parishes in Jamaica, and we have regional offices. If they find that they are overwhelmed by a particular issue, sometimes the parent go to the police station. One of the problems that we found is that if a parent felt that they could not control the child, and a child at 16, 17, they would walk to their community police station and ask the police to just come and have a discussion with the child or something like that. So typically when that happens, we go in, because when all is said and done, Jamaica is still a community-oriented society. We rely on each other. We do a lot of things together as a community. And those things are what we do. So even before or after the CDA is called in. As it relates to violence and the movement of weapons, I wasn't sure I understood your question where that was concerned, because I don't think that they're inextricably linked in terms of children who go missing. So I wasn't sure what you meant by...
No, I don't think it was meant to be linked to children going missing, but it was a question to the violence in your society.
The violence in society relating to weapons, that is dealt with by the police. I can give you specific statistics maybe in the second round, but just to say to you that I know in particular that the Minister of National Security has implemented the anti-gang legislation, the Suppressions of Crime Act, which looks at how police intervene, which we do. We have regular spot checks on the road. We also have increased our intelligence in the police services, and that has given the police better mechanisms for targeting where some of those things are. We also have better policing at our ports of entry. Jamaica has one of the largest ports in the world, and we now have better surveillance systems there. So that also helps in terms of how we monitor the movement of weapons and how we feel that young people have access to weapons.
Thank you. Ms. Sharif?
Thank you, Madam Chair. In response to your anti-gang legislation, I'd like to know how effective has it been in reducing gang activities? I assume it's aimed at gang activities.
Yes, it is. And it's early days yet, but I would be able to give you those statistics in the second round. It is having an impact on the ground, both in terms of how the police are now doing their work, the level of intelligence that's coming forward, the level of penalties if a young person is thought to be in a gang, and their response mechanisms to it. But if you'd allow me to just give you the specific statistics in the other round.
Follow up, is there any retaliation by the gangs?
Let me give you those statistics in the other round. I don't want to just answer off the cuff and say no or yes.
That's fine. We are happy to get that statistics.
Okay.
And your question is answered by this? Good. So you can go on, I think.
All right. Let's see. The 1997 legislation that you spoke of, that is now being subsumed in several other pieces of legislation. That 1997 policy that you spoke on children, that was now subsumed under the CCPA as a universal and overarching legislation that deals with children. So I'm not sure if you're asking if we are still using it, because the policy has evolved so much since 1997. Right now, the Ministry of Justice is in consultation and anchoring the review process on the Single Institute for National Human Rights. That was convened last year, July, and those consultations are ongoing on the Ministry of Justice. The Honourable Mark Golding are leading those discussions with primary stakeholders. But we still have independent bodies. We have the Office of the Children's Advocate, which reports to Parliament, which is the highest body of the land, and she presents periodic reviews to Parliament. We also have the Public Defender, which is also an independent entity, which makes sure that persons who need human rights and other issues to be dealt with legally can go to the Public Defender. And that review is taking place now, because there are some who feel, and so we will be able to report to you probably later this year as to where we are with that review.
Yes, Ms.
Thank
Sharif.
you. The discussions on the independent body has been going on for some time. There has been a fair delay in that. Do you foresee something coming out from these discussions in the immediate near future?
That's not true that it's been going on for a long time. Certainly not at the government level, because it has never really had the highest policy attention, because we've had the Public Defender and we have other independent. That just started really formally in July of last year. So where that is concerned, as a democracy, we are listening to a number of views on how it should be done, etc. So I would say to you that we would be in a better position to tell you what that dialogue looks like and what that review could look like a little later on this year. Is that so? You asked the question about the Office of the Children's Advocate, if it's been reviewed. As I said before, it's an independent arm of Parliament, and so it comes to Parliament with it's not under the executive. And so they are very independent. It's resourced by the government, and they present reviews on what is happening with regards to children. As it relates to the budget and what we spend on the budget, I can tell you that the education budget by itself is 17% of our national budget. It's quite a hefty sum. And even though we are under an IMF agreement, and I think most of you know that we're under a strict fiscal program, our government has not cut the social safety net and the social protection programs to children. As a matter of fact, they've increased, especially under the program for the advancement of the advancement of health and education and the like. We've actually increased our subventions. The program to the CDA has not been cut, the program to improve our children's homes, etc. And so what I would be able to do with you, Madam Chair, is the Ministry of Finance currently is collating that data to give you a cumulative figure on the percentage. But by itself, the different ministries spend an allocation and a portion on children. So they're currently collating that data for you. I know that we were in the middle of preparing for our budgets to be tabled in the opening of Parliament for February. So a lot of the technical people were involved in making sure that budget, but they are in the middle of also preparing this for you.
So that means you would be able to provide us with it tomorrow or the day after or something? Or? Because we really make the concluding observations very soon after this
I know. I will
discussion.
speak with my Minister of Finance tomorrow, but as I say to you, I know what it takes to go into preparing a budget. That budget is being completed now for the opening of Parliament and for the tabling of the estimates of expenditure in February. And so I would say to you humbly, I don't think I would be able to give you that answer tomorrow. I can probably give you each breakdown of each ministry, but I know that you asked for a cumulative approach, and I know that the Ministry of Finance is tied up at the moment in putting the final figures together. That social investment program in children that you spoke of was done by the Planning Institute of Jamaica in 2006. The Planning Institute of Jamaica, as you know, does a lot of data collection and a lot of studies. We are guided by a number of those studies, and since 2006 we've implemented a number of things coming out of the PIOJ, even in terms of how we address funding, etc. One of the issues, though, is that, as you rightly pointed out, we have several data collection mechanisms, also from the Ministry of Youth, also from the CDA, and so that interministerial helps to guide that. But the information from 2006 has been used to some extent. The gaps in the data collection we are addressing by having everybody sit at the table and by having the division in the ministry, also with our legal officer, go through the various pieces of data and legislation to see where those gaps are. And one of the things that we've been able to do, certainly coming out of it, is to have the various accounting officers of the Ministry of Health and Education, and we point those out to them to say, well, we are doing A, B, and C. We realize that you're duplicating that effort, so we think your resources could be used a little bit better in that particular area. And that was evident as well in how we were manipulating our rehabilitation efforts in the juvenile centers. So one of the things we did was, in the data collection, we saw where, coming from the Ministry of Youth and Culture and coming from the Ministry of National Security, that there was need for rehabilitation. And both of us were doing the same thing. And what we looked at was how to now utilize the resources better. And so we asked for the Ministry of Education to provide the teachers. We provided the cultural programs. The Ministry of National Security provided the infrastructure and the retrofitting. So it has been a collaborative effort in the way that we now use our data, and we're addressing some of the gaps in the data. The child labor law, I think the best way to answer that question when I heard you ask it was that with the increased places and attendance in school now in Jamaica, what we're seeing is that there are not a lot of children in child labor. The last statistics I saw put the number of children in child labor in 2013 as a total from 2007 to 2013 to 699. That's over 6 years. And so based on the figures that we have, and so they're not by way of statistics, we wouldn't say that we have a child labor problem in Jamaica. And children must be in school. And we have persons who monitor that children are in school for whatever reason. Chair?
Yes, please. I look up and I see them myself.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, I was just wondering, with poverty, with a high level of poverty, how do these single households manage, especially some of the households which are headed by children?
Some of the households that are headed by children?
Excuse me, I think this has to do with the second round of questions. We should keep that for later. I think it's connected to other issues as well.
As it relates to children who have parents who are in lockups or jails or who have been sentenced, we have a very, very strong policy on child protection, and that is integrated. So once a child has been reported as having a parent who is incarcerated for whatever reason, the CDA steps in and provides support, and the other state agencies through the Ministry of Labour actually step in and also provide support in terms of that.
I think the question was actually, what do the courts do when they sentence a parent? Do they take into account the best interests of the child when they actually decide on the sentence, whether capital punishment could be used, or whether there should be a long prison sentence or a shorter, or whether it's possible not to have a child, not to have a parent in prison at all?
Well, based on our systems, yes. When a person is sentenced, if the person has a child or children, that is also reported to the various agencies and the social networking system that we have, and then that kicks in.
But do the courts actually take it into account in their sentencing? I've been discussing this with judges in Scandinavia, and they say, no, we cannot do it because we have to treat everybody alike. And I was very surprised because you never treat people alike in that sense when it comes to sentencing.
But Chair, with respect, I mean, I don't know that we could answer that question on sentencing. I think certainly the laws of the country are clear. If somebody commits a crime, there's a penalty which deals with that crime.
Well, the penalty is very often within frames. You don't need to use either that number of years or that number of years. But Mr. Maddy.
Yet in this case, I mean, the question will arise, are judges in Jamaica are trained? My mic is on. In this respect, the question is, are judges in Jamaica are trained on child's right? You know, in order for them, when they die, I mean, it's a decision of a judge is sometimes final, sometimes it's appeal, and so on. But are they trained on the rights of the child, on the convention, when they deal with cases of parents where children, particularly young children, are involved? There is always, in any law around the world, there is minimum and maximum sentence. So if judges are well trained on the children's right, I think they will make up the appropriate decision in this respect. Thank you.
If I may. You're absolutely right, and our judges are trained not only in terms of the CCPA, which is the Child Care and Protection Act, but the judges are trained on the best interest of the child, and the judges have the discretion to give the maximum or the minimum sentencing based on the issues that surround that particular person that is being charged or that is facing a sentence. Should I go on? Okay.
Yes.
Well,
Ms. Kazova had a question.
With regard to training judges and implementing the principle of the best interests of the child, it's just generally speaking, I'm just curious whether you said that judges are widely applied and trained in how to apply the best interests of the child. The point is that this is one of the most difficult concepts to be applied in practice, and many countries, most of the countries, I would say, experience difficulties in that. So I have, in this regard, probably two questions: how you, not you personally, but generally, how it is estimated whether this principle is properly implemented, or I understand that there is always can be space for improvement, but still, for instance, in family dispute cases, and whether you have elaborated any specific list of factors that judges should take into account when deciding what is in the best interests of the child in a particular case, some kind of a list that will help them to solve this task.
Excellent question. And what I would say is this. Let me give you the example of how we operate, which is a CDA, the Child Development Agency. Let us say a child is in need of care and protection, because under the Child Care and Protection Act, if the penalty for not providing care and protection or for neglecting your child is a penalty under Jamaican law, if the judge decides to sentence that parent, then the child comes to the state. So typically what we do, and this is one particular case, or one type of case that goes before a judge, the Child Development Agency and other social workers will say to the judge, ask for mediation in particular, and say to the judge, we will work with that parent so that you don't penalize the parent and lock the parent up, because it doesn't serve the child well if you take the parent away. There's actually a section of the population that says, look, for you to break this kind of circumstance, start locking up the parents. And so where I stand as a minister, I have to say, and also as a parent, I have to say, look, let us work with the parent. Do not lock the parent up, because you do the child more of a disservice. That is why we implemented the parenting workshops. That is why the Ministry of Education has now put in place a National Parenting Support Commission and has put in place a national parenting policy to help parents deal with some of these exigent issues. Now, as it relates to higher crimes, then the judge, in their estimation...
Excuse me, there's something about the mic. I wonder if you could... this little thing on the side, is it properly into your...
Yes.
Yeah?
Yes.
So you can just go on. We'll see if it's okay, because it's off and on. That's why I'm asking.
Okay, I'm not sure. As it relates to other sentencing, I know the judges were trained by the Children's Advocate. There was a significant amount of training that was supported by multilateral agencies on training judges.
There's something wrong. I think if you can use this one, mic.
Okay.
You can be, if you just turn off this, and I think it's okay. You are not too far away from it.
Can you hear me now?
No, I have no problem. I hear you.
Okay. What happens, or what has happened, is that the Office of the Children's Advocate actually trains judges in the Convention on the Rights of the Child and how to deal with sentencing, particularly of parents, and also how to deal with sentencing of minors, etc., in circumstances. So it is an ongoing process. To say that it is a difficult situation, you are correct in saying that it is a difficult situation, and Jamaica as well are finding solutions to deal with it. But we have, in certain instances, and in most cases, if it is what you call a non-criminal offense per se, we typically say, as the CDA, we will work with the parent. Please don't lock the parent up. Oh.
Sorry, I think maybe it's only my earphones.
Perhaps.
Then you can continue using your own.
Would you like to use... Other issue about child participation, that is ongoing. As you pointed out in terms of 98%, you're correct that 98% of our children are registered. So I'm not sure where you get the 200,000 figure, because that wouldn't comply with our data that we have.
If I could just respond, Chair. I got it from one of the reports.
Which report was that?
I'm sorry, I can't recall
You can't
at the
divulge
moment.
them. Fine. But the issue, what date was given for that data?
To you on that, please?
Absolutely.
I think you should rather answer on the facts than discussing this figure. You can answer your facts.
Well, we have 98% of our children registered at birth, and those are the statistics coming from the RGD, which is our agency who deals with the registration of births. Madam Chair, those were the extent of the questions that were asked. I'm not sure if the rapporteur has any further questions or if I've delineated or answered most of what she has asked.
I would like myself to come back to what you said about the age of marriage and the age of sexual consent, because they need not be the same age. So I think we would like a more explicit answer on the age of marriage, whether you would consider raising that age to 18.
Well, I said that the age of consent, moving all things to 18, is now under review. And so I wouldn't be able to say to you whether we are going to take an approach to move it to 18 at the moment.
But do you then talk about the consent of parents for children to marry, or the age of sexual consent? And do you treat those two as the same thing, sexual consent and consent to marriage, or do you, and that would be sexual consent by the girl herself or the children themselves, or do you look at them separately? Because we think that they should be looked upon separately.
They are looked upon separately. If a young lady desires to get married at 16, she needs the consent of her parent to do it. She has to get consensual permission to do it.
And that is what we are now discussing, whether to raise it to 18 as a main rule for marriage.
We're looking at the discussion for all matters going to 18, and that is as a result of discussions within some elements of the country raising the issue about persons not being allowed to get married or vote until they become 18, but they are able to have consensual sex. So it is a discussion that is being echoed throughout some elements of the society, especially when we go to have the community discussions about sexual abuse, etc. And based on the discussions coming up when we go into the communities, especially by the mothers, the Ministry of Justice is looking at all the legislation which has issues dealing with 16 and issues dealing with 18, and how we review it, how we look at it, how we change it, how we modify it, how we bring compliance to all aspects of it. That not only deals with sex, it deals with marriage, it deals with a host of things.
But is it given that if the age is raised, it would be raised for all kinds of decisions, or it would be possible still to separate between marriage and consensual sex?
It would be looked at in terms, the issue now is consensual sex. So that is the issue that is giving persons in the country a little bit of discomfort. And that is why the review has taken, or the discussion is taking place towards looking at how to raise it for all instances. But as I said before, we don't have a situation in Jamaica where we have people coming, or young people or children coming forward to get married. We don't have a child bride policy, a child bride problem in Jamaica, and we don't have a child bride trend in Jamaica. We've never had that issue.
And then when you say child bride, do you then include those between 16 and 18, or do you just term it a child bride if she's under 16?
Child bride would be anybody under 18, because our definition of children is all persons under 18, as distinguished by our law. Well,
that's good to hear. It's still a matter of principle for this committee, and I wonder if you yourself would be, what would be your opinion on raising the age of marriage without, for instance, raising the age of sexual consent to 18?
Well, I think that's a contradiction in terms, because wouldn't you have to raise the consensual age of consent before you could actually get married, or wouldn't you be in contravention of the law then if you turn 18 or if you are getting married at 18 or 17, 17, and not permitted in various ways. So I can't give up. I'm speaking on behalf of the government of Jamaica, and I don't want to editorialize what I have to say. So asking my personal opinion, I think, is a little unfair in this circumstance.
Thank you. It would not be your personal opinion. It would be your opinion as a minister. But then I gather that you don't have a political opinion on this yet.
The issue as it relates to that, we've spoken about it at the Interministerial Committee, and one of the things why we're reviewing it is because based on the discussions coming out from the Ministry of Justice in terms of the community stakeholder meetings that we've been having, also with our health practitioners, also with the CDA, the Office of the Children's Advocate, we believe that it is an important discussion to have. And so we're now having the discussion to look at how to deal with the policy. And we've been doing a number of surveys about it. So yes, it is important, and it's on our radar for policy discussion at the cabinet level as well. So we're doing all of the information now and all the information gathering. So I would say to you, yes, it is a matter that is concerning us, because it is a matter that has inconsistencies in law.
I guess we'll have to leave it at that. Though I would just like to mention that there are a number of countries that have an age of sexual consent at 16, but still have as a minimum age of marriage 18 years. And we would really like to see the minimum age of marriage be 18, and even if we would not interfere with the age of sexual consent.
Okay, well, what I will do is if I may, with your permission, certainly take that back to the cabinet and raise that. Is that an issue that you would deem us non-compliant with if we don't do it?
Mr. Muddy would like a comment on this.
I think the issue is a bit confusing now. Where you said you don't have child pride, which means under 18, yet your law provide for marriage 16 and above. So it is a bit confusing. On the other hand, you don't have pride below 18, but you have sexual consent at 16. So if they are legally speaking can practice sex, but they don't marry until they reach 18. So I think there is discrepancy here in that sense. In practice, I'm talking about in practice, you know. They don't marry until 18, but they have the opportunity to have certain relations at 16. So what the chairperson has said is that, legally speaking, it's not difficult to raise the age of marriage to 18 in that sense. And if you wish to keep the sexual consent at 16, it's fine and well. Even in some other countries, in fact, in many countries, sexual consent sometimes is below even 16. Even in many European countries, I would say, it's below 16. You see, and age of marriage is 18 in that sense. So I think when you are considering the discussion on this issue, you may explain the point of view of the committee. Thank you.
He actually sounds like a lot of our Jamaicans when I go to the committees, because they raise that exact issue. And they raise other issues as well as it relates to the discrepancy. And that is one of the reasons why we are looking at it in all its forms, including other issues as it relates to social norms, cultural norms, etc. But I want to ask the chair again, based on the decisions taken on this matter, if we do or don't, is it considered non-compliance?
Well, this committee has interpreted the convention so as to to set a minimum age of marriage at 18 as the main rule, because otherwise would be a harmful practice. And then there might be narrow exceptions to that rule, but they need really to be clearly spelt out in the law, and it needs to be with the consent of a judge, etc. So really very narrow exceptions might be accepted to that rule, but we interpret the convention so as to say that 18 should be the minimum age of marriage.
Thank you, Chair. What I'll do is take back your comments, and I will have the interpretation of the CRC brought to the Attorney General's office and our Ministry of Justice. We will continue the dialogue, and I will be able to furnish an opinion, perhaps, on the matter for your consideration. When I get back to Jamaica, which is in a couple of days, I will be able to tell you a little bit more information on that.
That's interesting, and I should add that this committee would actually like to see no exceptions to this rule, if possible, of the minimum age. I think I should then turn to Ms. Aldozeri as rapporteur to give you the second round, or to start off the second round of questions.
Thank you. The first question...
Sorry, yes, I have a whole list of new questions on the second part. Yeah, so I'll just go straight away to the questions. My first part would be on disability, and I have two questions here. One on the National Strategic Plan for Early Childhood Development, which was developed for the years 2009-2013, and obviously we are in 2015 now. So have you developed a new phase of that strategy, 2014 onward? The second question is on the Early Stimulation Program, ESP. What is the coverage of this program? In the replies to the list of issues, you have stated that more than 1,500 children between age 0 to 8 with various developmental disabilities are under this program. It is, however, mainly operational in Kingston, St. Andrew, St. Catherine, St. Mary, and Portland. What about children in the rural part of the country, if you don't have any rural? Does this program reach children with disability in all the country? And also, is this program focuses on low-income families? Can you give us some numbers on how many families are registered or are identified, and in which area of the country? You have also mentioned information on special rehabilitation grant through the Ministry of Labour and Social Security. This grant is for children with disability. How much is the grant, and how many families receive it at the moment? Following the ratification of the CRPD and its optional protocol in 2006, you have formulated the Disabilities Act. What is the current status of the Act? Is it still in a draft form? Does it also secure the rights and active participation of children with disability in all spheres of society? Does it ensure the integration of children with disability in the society and as well as in schools? Sorry, I have so many questions for this part. What does advocacy has been done in this regard to the society in general, And similarly, what is the status of the draft curriculum to address the needs of children with disabilities? And can you also brief us on the content of this curriculum? And I wonder also if you have included the training of teachers working with disability in this curriculum. We also recognize the efforts to mainstream some children with disabilities in regular schools. There are still more than 4,000 children with disability attending special schools. Do you have any timely plan for the mainstreaming of all children with disabilities in regular schools? And also, are you planning to upgrade older school premises to make them more accessible? I remember that you have tapped on this in your opening remarks. The last question on this section is, what is the legal status of the National Plan for Disability? Is it enforced? The second area is on health and health services. Maternal mortality rate increased from 92.4 in every 100,000 to 111.7 in 1 year, that is 2012-2013. Unfortunately, we found no answer to reply to this in the list of issues, the causes. Why has it increased? We have not found answers on the medical and professional services for pregnancies and childbirth in rural and urban areas, teenage pregnancies, and STIs. So can I take the opportunity for your presence here with us to give us some questions directly? On mental health, we have reports stating that there are 21% of females and 23% of males aged 13 to 15 who admitted attempting suicide. I call this a high percentage. In females, 21 and 23 males. 13 to 15. Are there enough trained specialists like psychologists and social workers in school to identify those at risk? Psychologists to provide the right counseling? You have also stated in the replies to the list of issues that you managed to slow the rate of HIV/AIDS transmission. However, there's a prevalence of STIs and transmission of HIV/AIDS among adolescent girls due to sexual relations with infected older men, unsafe sexual practices, and forced sex. So, can I ask you here about the programs available for adolescents in schools to address this problem, and on providing reproductive health counseling that is in school? And do you have any financial assistance to provide poor families or to help poor families with children, especially with girls' children, to put them away from taking prostitution as income-generating practice? On education, is education free for all students in all tiers? What we understood that in secondary school, the school requires paying fees. No. Another question on secondary school, I'll take your answer that they are free for everyone, or they are made free now. Can secondary school cater for all students? Are there enough schools? We understood also from reports that you have managed to cover for the lack of schools for secondary education by extending school day. Was this helpful? Was it enough? Did it overcome the problem? Also, do you have enough teachers, trained teachers, for this level of education? Do you have any plans to build more schools? In your replies to the list of issues and under the reintegration of school-aged mothers into the formal school system, you have also tapped on this in your opening speech, Madam Head of Delegation. You have asserted that you expect to reintegrate 100% of those school-aged mothers into the formal school system. Can you please shed more light on how do you assert this? Children in street situation. Again, in the replies to the list of issues, you have stated that there are around 6,500 children in street situation, according to the survey conducted in 2002. That was in 2002. So do you have any updated size of the phenomena, if we may call it? I know you don't like the word phenomena. But do you have any updated statistics? What measures and programs are adopted to strengthen the social support system in order to remove these children from the streets? And what are the rehabilitation programs designed for those children in terms of reintegrating them into the educational system and provide them with the medical care and psychological support required, especially for those who are infected with HIV/AIDS? Well, I did mention earlier this morning our acknowledgement of the various activities carried out by the National Task Force in combating abduction and trafficking for children. But reports we have tell us that there is still a problem with trafficking of children from rural to urban areas for the purposes of forced labor, sex exploitation, including sex tourism. Moreover, there were 7 cases of trafficking before the authorities. Only 1 case was persecuted. Can you please elaborate on this? And there were 23 victims of trafficking rescued between 2012 and 2013. Do you have any programs in place for the rehabilitation of these rescued victims? Those are my questions. I will be having some more questions maybe for tomorrow. Thank you very much. And can you please also give us any time that you have to submit the reports on the optional protocols? Is it going to be soon? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Then I pass on the floor to the other rapporteur, Ms. Sharif.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have several questions. I will be looking at the family environment and alternative care cluster. For family environment, what kind of support is given to families with low incomes or single-parent households to ensure that these families stay intact and are able to perform their child-rearing responsibilities? Are families given counseling and parenting skill programs? What about daycare facilities for children under 3 of age coming from middle and low-income families? Are these facilities easily available to parents from such families in both rural and urban areas? My next question is on adoption. Sorry. My next question is on adoption. You did mention that it's easier now, but from the information that I have, adoption is in Jamaica, it involves a very cumbersome and lengthy process. The Jamaican adoption system, if streamlined and reformed, has the ability to provide stable homes for children and assist in the deinstitutionalization of alternative care. And at the end of the day, save resources for the government. I understand that there is a shortage of officers to handle adoption cases, especially conducting investigations and preparing paperwork. For some, the current system is frustrating because it takes a long time. I understand that the request as far back as 1990 was still pending in early of January 2014. There were 311 unresolved requests in 2014. I believe you are looking at reviewing the Adoption Act. Similarly, on foster care, if done properly, can also significantly bolster effects to deinstitutionalize childcare in Jamaica. Very little resources are committed to foster care in Jamaica. Foster parents end up being out of pocket when they take in foster children because they have to, sometimes payments are slow or late, and the payments are not sufficient to cover the expenses of the children. And there's also lack of support in the sense that there are no visits from the social welfare offices. My next question is children in state care facilities. As of March 2013, 5,034 children were recorded as being under the care of the state. Many of these children remain at the risk of harm even after their removal from their homes to state-run facilities. Now, children in custody of state may be subjected to some kind of inhuman, degrading treatment. They are at risk of physical and psychological, emotional, and sexual abuse, and at times deprived of their rights to protection and care. The CCPA mandates the CDA brings a child in need of care and protection to a children's court, which should then place the child with a fit person or in place of safety until she or he is assessed. Later, the child is taken to an appropriate children's home. Now, this directive is not taken into consideration most of the time. Can you elaborate on this? I like to make mention of the Keating report. According to your list of replies on the Keating report, 93% of the 46 recommendations have been acted on, out of which 29 have been fully implemented, 14 are at varying degrees of implementation, 3 have not been implemented. Can you please elaborate a little on this? Apart from this, I would like you to make mention and discuss the National Child Diversion Policy, how it helps juveniles. Do you have any data on children in prisons with their mothers? I'm also very interested in the barrel children issue. I understand that the barrel children in Jamaica are having a harder time coping without their parents and often have suicidal thoughts. It has been found that 3 in every 10 Jamaican households had children whose parents had migrated to North America or United Kingdom, often in search of economic opportunities. Now, migration, I understand, has been labeled as the single strongest factor that contributes to the breakdown of the contemporary Jamaican family, contributing to poor academic performance, delinquent behavior. Studies have also revealed that these children are at risk of sexual and abuse and prostitution. And I also like to know the victims of the fire in the Armdale facility. Have their families been compensated? Thank you. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Mr. Madi?
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I would like to go back to the issue of child labor, which was supposedly to be postponed till the second round. I understand, Honourable Minister, that you said that the number of children involved in the labor market, according to the latest statistics, have dropped dramatically, as a matter of fact, to about 600 and something, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, if it's very short, because this is the question.
699 was
Okay.
for the period of, was for
this,
over 6 years.
Sure. This, in fact, may show that you have a very good labor inspection system, that you are able to identify exactly how many children are involved in the labor market. This is number one. If you have this system, or you may have such number of statistics from educational system as the school dropouts in that sense. Yet, at any rate, that means that you know how many children are involved in that sense. Of course, the question then, what have you done in this regard, with regard to violation by employers of the labor laws, and is there any prosecution in this respect? Finally, this number, 690 something, included children working in the tourism industry, as well as those working in the informal sector, as family business and so on. These are the issues I wanted to raise in this respect. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Kazova.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question, in a sense very general, in a sense very precise, and it concerns support to families that face different problems. Partly it was already discussed. One of the aspects was raised by my colleague, Ms. Sharif, but still I'm afraid I don't have, even taking into account that you will answer tomorrow, I'm afraid I may not get the complete picture, and in order not to interrupt tomorrow's discussion, I wanted to clarify. The point is that, for instance, if we take the high incidence of crimes among adolescents, I assume it went down after uncontrolled behavior was withdrawn from the statistics. So it helps statistics, but it doesn't help to solve the problem, because uncontrolled behavior is still uncontrolled behavior, and it should be somehow tackled. You said that you developed lots of problem of therapeutic intervention and work with the adolescents themselves, but I'm wondering, do you have any specific programs or plans or measures to address this issue, to address the root causes, in order to prevent this from happening at such a huge scale? You see, a lot of high incidence of adolescents' crime, high incidence of children missing and returning back. Fortunately, lots of violence. It's clearly a symptom of lack of attention, a lack of early intervention with the family, which faces different social and economic problems. So it's a kind of a systemic issue. So do you have any, you said that you have lots of parenting seminars, but this was mentioned with regard to missing children. So we would like to have the full picture, how you work with the families in troubles or with families with problems in order to prevent negative development out of home placement or criminalization of adolescent. Thank you. And one minor question.
Then you have to be very quick. I have a few questions also I need to ask.
You have an exciting program, Art for Life, but only for girls. Why not for boys?
Thank you. I would like to ask a question on climate change. Of course, you know that there may be a problem for your country with the climate change, as for many other countries. So I wonder, what are you doing to meet these adverse effects of the climate change? Do you have any strategies, or do you sensitize children and so on? I would like to hear something about your work in this respect. I also wonder, when it comes to adolescent health and reproductive health in particular, do children need parental consent to access contraceptives? I wonder, with regard to juvenile justice, are children still locked up in or detained in police lockups for extended periods, or whether they are locked up at all? And also I wonder, well, one thing is what happens in practice, another thing is what is in the law. Is it illegal? Is it really clearly illegal to put them in police lockups? And what happens in practice in this respect? I wonder, gang violence, we have touched upon that. We talked about the law, but if you could elaborate a bit more on the measures you use in practice to meet the problem of gang violence, I think that would be interesting. I think then, very brief, because we have half a minute.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to raise the issue of suicides in correctional centres. I think you're aware of the Vanistas case. And also in 2012, at least 6 girls had attempted suicide at the Horizon and Fort Augusta facilities. Could you also address us on that? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think then we can call it a day and wish you a pleasant evening and hopefully a good night at the end of it. Thank you. And then we see you again tomorrow morning here at 10 o'clock. Thank you. And for the committee, we continue in private.